Hello and welcome to the CLB Forge podcast. This is the show to help equip you and your church for mission, ministry, and multiplying disciples. I'm Mike Natal.
And I'm Ryan Nilsson. Welcome to episode 17. Today's guest has been married to his wife, Melissa, for 27 years. They have 4 kids. He went to Lutheran Brethren Seminary with a background in music education, has recorded 4 CDs, has served with InterVarsity and Bethel Lutheran Church in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. He earned his PhD in Biblical Studies from Concordia, St. Louis in 2017. And he currently serves as the Academic Dean of Lutheran Brethren Seminary, as well as Professor of Old Testament. And in 2018, he published a book titled Prayer Book of Christ, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Christological Interpretation of the Psalms. He has a blog at bradpribbenow.wordpress.com, and he hosts a podcast for LBS called Embracing the Word, Reaching the World. Please welcome Dr. Brad Pribbenow.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Great to have you
with us. Although, Mike, It looks like we have another underachiever with us on the show.
Every time we read bios, I feel more and more convicted that I need to do more and more stuff, because I just look and I'm like, man, I'm so underwhelming in comparison to a lot of these guests, which is really good. And in fact, when I met Brad, this might be very intimidating for people who are listening, but when we first met, it was in his office at Bethel Church, and I got invited to a Greek read-through with him and the now Dr. Daniel Berge. And so talk about feeling underqualified to even sit there. I was like, man, this is just wild. And so that's the first time I met Brad.
Inspiration. Like, that's what he did.
Man.
Mike, I kind of thought you were going to say that
you
slept under his desk for a month or something like that.
No, that was Troy Tisdall.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, Troy is the only person who that really happens with. So, no, Brad actually got my first worship leader gig ever when Brad transitioned. He was the worship leader at Bethel, right, Brad? And then you transitioned to Concordia. Is that when it was? When you went down to St. Louis?
Yep, when I left there. Yep.
And he said, well, how would you like to lead worship? And I was like, I guess I could try that. And he's like, you'll do fine. It'll be fine. And so the whole summer I was like the worship leader at Bethel.
Yeah.
And it worked out really well. So
That's
that was
great.
really cool.
Oh, cool.
Yep, I remember that. I remember that fondly.
Yeah. So I appreciate that.
We got to give a shout out to Brad as well for just being a huge help in getting this podcast started. So Brad was an inspiration to us with his own podcast, with LBS's podcasts. Seeing that going really helped, I think just stir our imaginations for what could be possible. And Brad was also very helpful with advice and just connected with me before we got going in the planning stages, and was just really, really helpful in getting started. So we're doing this in big part thanks to you, Brad. So thank you for all your help.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's kind of iron sharpens iron now. You guys are pacing, keeping the good pace going. So love it.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks.
Thank you for the encouragement. So Brad, can you give us a little bit of an intro of maybe let our audience know what your spiritual journey has been like?
Yeah, gladly. And thanks again for the invite to be here today. I grew up youngest by 7 minutes in my family of 6. I have a twin sister. And my older siblings, experienced my dad as a pastor. And by the time my twin sister and I came around, though, he kind of moved into chaplain ministry in a hospital. So we didn't kind of have that same kind of PK experience, but grew up in a Christian home, some great role models there. But I would say it was probably college, leaving home and going to college. Went to a state college in northwest part of Wisconsin called University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. And that's really where, growth really took off. I got involved with campus ministry. And through that was my introduction to the Church of the Lutheran Brethren. Through there, a number of students went there. So that was an incredible time of growth. I mean, growth in God's Word, the ministry of InterVarsity was crucial. Just the opportunities for evangelism, prayer, encouragement with one another there. And I would say, probably discipleship for me. I know that's a topic you guys often raise up. Initially it was probably more programmatic. I was engaged, both receiving end and then eventually as a leader within a university in one-on-one relationships and men's groups and small group Bible studies, and daily prayer meetings was actually a huge part of our ministry. I remember gathering in these stairwells off in various buildings and praying for our departments and our dorms, and that was really a huge part of my growth. And even into the next years, I worked for about 5 years in university and continued on campuses, local campuses throughout Wisconsin, but just had some great mentors, other leaders, gathering for, regional conferences and as well as more local events and again, outreaches and things. So that too, in terms of my kind of attention and maybe some skill and relationally and working with student leaders and with new believer groups and on campus and learning also that kind of unique dance between the partnership between the church and a parachurch was always interesting and learning those relationships. So that's a big part of my growth. I continued to work at, after university, I did work as a full-time worship director at one of our LB churches in Eau Claire, and really learning to learn more about kind of the inner workings of church and leadership there. Was also very formative. Some great people I worked with, Rick Britston, John Weil, Ronnie Benberg, and had the opportunity to work with a lot of those guys in ministry out of Eau Claire.
Neat. How did you first become interested in teaching at the seminary?
Yeah, well, I didn't willfully go into education. I wanted to be a performer. Kind of wanted all that rich and famous stuff I had in my mind leaving high school. But I think in college, making that move first to music education was a big part of sort of stirring up some interest and seeing a sense of some passion and gifts in that area. I did a lot of private lessons, guitar, percussion, piano, those kind of things. But even coming to seminary, I came primarily to learn, just wanted to be more equipped for whatever ministry God might have. But it was, I started in January. I started mid-year in seminary here at Lutheran Brethren Seminary. And I remember it was a meal I had that Dr. VM was a part of, now president. And at that point, he was still serving as a pastor at Bethel here in Fergus Falls. And he just looked over to me, and I still remember him saying, you should think about going on and getting a PhD in worship, was his encouragement. And those of you that have had conversations with Dr. VM know how some of those suggestions can kind of just send you spinning. And that was the first time I really thought about teaching. And honestly, I kind of wrestled with that for my handful of years. I kind of thought I would come to seminary and take a solo pastoral call, or everyone wants the associate. Likelihood of that is not great. But then to start to wrestle with what is that? What might a career in teaching look like? And honestly, I kind of felt guilty because I knew the need in our churches. I knew our churches needed pastors, and I sensed by God's grace I could serve in that capacity and had interest. So this thought of is it sort of selfish to go that route of education, something I really enjoyed. Not knowing at that point that I would land here at LBS, but I wrestled with that, and I think in a way that all of us sort of have to wrestle with our sense of calling and our gifts, and then kind of settle into that area as God leaded. So that's where it started.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, myself included, have had conversations like that with Dr. VM, where he kind of just volleys a question at you that puts you on a trajectory, especially when it comes to seminary. Like, some of the questions that he asks really put you on a trajectory to really genuinely think about attending LBS. And that's one of the things that I'm always amazed by whenever he goes around to talk to people, is just how he does that and how he puts it in perspective to kind of bring people in. So that's fantastic. So Brad, now as a professor at the seminary, also the academic dean too, what are some of the tasks that you are in charge of? Yeah,
well, those two things are kind of within my calling assignment. So just to take the teaching side first. So I'm professor of Old Testament. So we cover the Old Testament in 3 different courses. And so I teach 3 Old Testament courses, and then as I came here, we began, to the chagrin of a number of students, requiring Hebrew. So I get to teach 2 Hebrew courses. That was an elective as I went through, and as some of you guys went through. So I teach a fall and a spring course, which get us introductory Hebrew, and then we go through the book of Jonah, word by word, letter by letter in Hebrew. And then on top of that, I also teach a worship class, which we actually do in an intensive format, a 1-week intensive format every other August. So that's my teaching load, and other duties, I guess, as things pop up. But then the dean side, that really, I guess, in a nutshell, I'm responsible to kind of ensure the integrity of the program. So that involves the educational program. So that involves everything from accreditation working hand in hand with our president and registrar and applications and new student orientation, monitoring, kind of evaluating the courses, kind of all the things that are involved with kind of just, again, ensuring the integrity and the quality of the educational program. So those are the 2 I teach and administrate, those 2 areas.
So, especially in your role as academic dean, I know you have a number of leadership and management responsibilities. And I'm curious, what are 1 or 2 lessons that come to mind that you've learned about Christian leadership in your time at LBS?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I can think of a couple, and maybe I'll tie these to 2 leaders, people that have been mentors for me, Gene Bowe and David Beam, who are still serving here, of course. And I think one of them is that, each leader is unique. And so you kind of have to learn your own gifts and approach, and then just press into that. There's a temptation, as I filled this office of dean behind a guy who served here for a number of decades. We see that example and you think, I've got to be like that. And so I've been doing this, starting my 3rd year, and start to feel like, okay, it's becoming my own. So part of that learning curve is just learning my own characteristics and gifts, and how to live out of those and not try to be what someone else was. But then I think a second is just that effective leadership really starts, the foundation of that is engaged relationships with those that you're working with. And I just remember Dr. Bowe, sometimes he'd just walk up and down the hallway. He was just present, and come in and stick his head in. Hey, and it might be anything from me, or how's it going, or how's this class going, or just various ways to stay connected to all your people. And we have, we've got 6 faculty here, and a number of staff, and they're all kind of in a silo in one regard, in their own department, in their own area. And it can really be easy to sort of just carry out your duties in that way. But when we want to try to keep that team connected, and we really do have a great team, great kind of chemistry, and I'm very thankful to kind of inherit that and work with that.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's definitely one of the things that I really noticed going to LBS was the continuity between all the professors and faculty members, and even the people who work there too, just to have that type of togetherness. And every teacher taught a specific trait and subject, but each one was focused on a greater purpose, which is really, I feel like, the focus on LBS is just trying to prepare and equip pastors to go out into the mission field and be better prepared on a host of different fronts. And so the next couple questions that I have are really for like our listeners who maybe aren't aware of the seminary, maybe don't really know what the seminary has to offer, but maybe they're listening today and they're thinking, I've been thinking about going to seminary. I'm not really sure where to go. Maybe some people didn't even know that we have a seminary who are listening to this. And so I have a couple questions to ask, but I think I'll ask them kind of one at a time and then let you kind of answer them as we go. So the first one is for our listeners, what's the purpose of the Lutheran Brethren Seminary?
Yeah. I mean, I can give you a short and sweet answer, just kind of with our vision statement is the vision of our kind of mission statement of our seminary is we serve the church and the world by preparing servants of Christ for a life of ministry and God's mission, and that those people then can go out and equip others, because it's not just about maybe a Bible school might have more of a focus on equipping people to carry out God's mission, but we're also equipping those who will equip others. And so that would be the sweet and short kind of version of what our purpose is.
Nice. So going off of the purpose, what are some of the preparations that the seminary offers in order to prepare people to become better disciple makers?
Yep. Well, we kind of offer, we kind of have one package in three different shapes, you might say, or one sense of content that you can take at three different levels, if you will. And we offer, I'll just put these in kind of full-time framework, a 1-year certificates, 30 credits. So some people take multiple years to do that, but certificate in theological studies. So if you're interested in kind of Bible and theology, you can come with a focus there, or lay ministry. Maybe you want to be a more effective minister, volunteer minister in your church, but not maybe on staff, or missions. So our missionaries typically have at least the certificate program. And so you can get different emphases of that 30 credit certificate. Next package would be the Master of Theological Studies, which is a 60 credit, about 2 years if it was full time. And that's, so Master of Theological Studies, that's kind of everything except the heavy duty pastoral things, so languages and some of the extra preaching courses and such that the MDiv students would take. And then there is the MDiv. So we get some students that, that are here, they're maybe youth workers or they're Christian educators or in something, and they want some theological grounding. You get all the biblical courses, you get the systematics, and then you get a lot of electives in that sort of middle Master of Theological Studies. And they may choose that, or they want to go on for more advanced studies, and they would get a master's kind of as an intermediate between a bachelor and a doctorate. And then we have the full 3-year, 90 credit. Some take as many as 6 or 7 years, to complete, but that's the full preparation for ordained pastoral ministry in the Church of Lutheran Brethren.
So how does having a seminary benefit our denomination?
Yeah. Well, if I can maybe do a little self-promotion, I guess, shameful plug, by way of a quote from our own President Paul Larson. He's said in some recent publications that if LBS didn't exist, the Church of the Lutheran Brethren wouldn't exist. And I think humbly that that's very accurate. That I know as I came to seminary, I had maybe call it what you will, a potpourri kind of theology. I mean, I've been influenced by a number of different sources. Campus ministry was one that introduces you to lots of different theological approaches as you work together in kind of a parachurch. But I didn't have a system that was sort of coherent and consistent. And I think going through our seminary and what our pastors and I'll say our missionaries and people that are serving in various places in our church, what we get as a gift is this holistic, consistent system, that when we want to deal with a certain doctrine of the church or the Holy Spirit or sacraments or whatever, we can understand kind of where we've been. We can kind of take a look at the scriptures and be consistent. We know kind of what the major passages are that speak to some of these issues and what some of the complementary ones are, maybe less clear. So we have a coherent system so that we can minister out of. So I think that's a huge gift, to our church. And I think that if, we all know people have gone to other seminaries. I think one comment I remember one person saying is, I like kind of going to this class and getting this perspective and going here and getting this perspective and here. And because they didn't want someone sort of, giving them an overarching system to take that they had to adhere to. And I think, obviously we can appreciate some benefits of that, but I think sometimes what can come out of that is maybe a bit of a convoluted system. It's just not consistent in the ways that our perspective might be. So I think that's a real benefit for our church.
Sure. If I could kind of volley a hypothetical at you, what do you think it would be like if we as a denomination didn't have a seminary to prepare our pastors?
Yeah, well, we really work hand in hand with the Office of the President and ongoing education for pastors. And we have a lot of churches that maybe aren't in the place to call a full-time pastor and they call a lay pastor. So we really work hand in hand with them to equip. So I think, again, you're maybe in a local church, you're calling someone, if you don't have access or funds or whatever, that might call a full-time pastor graduate from our seminary. I could see you're calling somebody and they're bringing, again, a mixture of theological perspectives to bear. And I think, that might cause some challenges, and kind of just keeping a unified theological approach. We are quite autonomous and church to church, but yet there is kind of that overarching umbrella of a theological approach and support. That would be another thing. We try to, as faculty, kind of help questions and theological issues and practical issues, and having that support and resource as a church is, I think, really vitally important.
Yeah, definitely. I know, having talked to lay people or parishioners, one of the things that they totally love about the Church of Lutheran Brethren, and I think that the seminary is the reason why it's like this, is that even if they go on vacation and they visit another church that's a part of the Church of Lutheran Brethren, they are always guaranteed that the worship service is going to focus on the Word of God. They're going to go to a place where the Word of God is going to be preached in law and gospel, no matter the church that they go to, as long as it's Lutheran Brethren. And I think that the seminary has a huge deal to do with that they prepare the pastors to be able to preach sermons that elevate the Word of God in a way that individuals can hear it consistently, no matter what church they go to that's attached with the name Lutheran Brethren.
Yeah, that's what you would hope you take out of a seminary education, and certainly hope and trust that takes place in our congregations too. So
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. So Brad, you've been on faculty since, I think, 2011. So having been there, so you'll have your 10-year anniversary next fall, right? So note to your fellow faculty members, they can start getting the cake ready.
They can. I'll watch out for the whispers down the hall and secret planning.
All right. So you've been on a part of the faculty for over 9 years now. In your time at LBS, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen the seminary face, and what are some of the biggest accomplishments as well? Because I think there are just sometimes the most impressive stories and the ways we see God working. Many of us don't even get to hear about them. Sometimes they happen behind the scenes. Can you share some of those challenges and achievements that you've seen God lead your school through?
Yeah, I think maybe the answer to both is really similar. If you look around, if you are one to sort of pay attention to what's happening in seminaries across the country, they are struggling. Christian education and higher education in lots of places really struggling financially is one, and student numbers and all. I was encouraged a couple of weeks ago. Wayne Rognus is our financial officer, and he came down and just we don't want to be overconfident, but he said, we've got a really strong foundation. We've got some great endowments. So I think that's an encouragement that we are in a place that a lot of other seminaries aren't. And it's really a testimony to the faithfulness of many who have given and supported over the years and put those things that now go to help scholarships and many of those needs. But I would say maybe the biggest challenge facing lots of seminaries and ours is numbers, and how that relates to sort of what does seminary education look like in kind of a virtual world? As you guys know and are aware of and have benefited from, and I know, Ryan, for you, the distance education is kind of the thing. It's being forced on us at the lower levels now by the pandemic, of course, but we made a change, and this would be into some of our biggest accomplishments. We made a move around 2013 to officially get approved with the distance ed program, and I think we've said here in the seminary that if we didn't establish that and all the infrastructure that comes with it, you can go from start to finish and do your whole MDiv program if you want, or any of the other Master Theological Study or certificate by distance ed without having moved here. So on one hand, that's a great thing. The sort of downside of that is that we really miss the vibrant social aspect of having students here. And so it causes us to, on site, it causes us to sort of ask some of those questions. What is seminary education? What does formation of our pastors look like And it is not, obviously, look at the church, it's not to be intended to be an individualistic thing. So with the tension that we have is to continue to invest in our infrastructure, which I'll just say the whole quarantining and shutting down of schools and institutions this past spring, I would say really didn't faze us. I'm happy to say. I mean, we have the infrastructure so we can teach from on-site. We moved, students moved off-site while teachers were here, was the first move, and then we all were at home and logged in using this medium here, Zoom, and we really didn't miss a beat. And so that is, I think, a huge blessing for us, just in with this dynamic of now in this context. But I think it also helps, that distance ed infrastructure also helps, because we do have a lot of churches who have that have needs right now for a pastor. And so this allows students to maybe take a call and serve the whole time they're in seminary as they're getting their training, which can be a long haul as they're working at the church and doing education, or it can allow them to come here for seminary for a year or two and then take a call in their third year. What it does to help provide pastors and sometimes student pastors for a while at our churches is a huge blessing to them. And for that, it's worth it, because we're here not to just receive from the churches, but to give. So I think that's it's a challenge how that sort of affects our sense of community here. We work hard. We do some online prayer time. We try to incorporate distance ed students in our chapel while still having chapel locally and gather prayer here and such. So that social dynamic is both a challenge, and I think we've risen to the challenge, and it's produced some of our greatest accomplishments in recent years.
Yeah, that's tremendous. That's actually, so let's see, when this is going to air, about a month prior to this airing, we talked with Dr. Bjerkes, and he mentioned the same thing. And, LBDI, which is a big part of the digital spectrum too, of what the Church of Lutheran Brethren is doing. And it's just amazing how God was tracking the seminary in order to, like you said, just kind of roll with it. When the pandemic came, you guys were like, hey, we're already prepared for this. Yeah. And it allowed you guys to still teach, still minister, and still be present for students, not only who were digitally already there, but also for those who were in the Fergus area. You were able to still equip them and teach them so that there was really no downtime. So that's tremendous that God was able to use that. And I know that Dr. Bjerkes was pretty integral in helping you guys get to that digital platform quicker than just the pandemic, so you guys weren't scrambling.
Yeah, and God has provided people just like that at the right time to help us make that move.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of answered this a little bit in your last question, but what are some of the unique advantages of attending the seminar, our seminary in particular, versus another one?
Yeah. I mean, just quick, I think we are smaller, and sometimes I run into people that that don't know who we are and kind of talk about the seminary here. We've got about 40 students, and so they're like, "Oh, that's it?" Huh? And these are larger seminaries that are used to hundreds of people maybe coming through. But obviously that student to teacher ratio is huge, or small, should I say. I mean, so the access that you have to us as faculty and staff, I think, is a huge blessing. I think for us, we are church-based, church-minded seminary, and so while it might be a different experience for some guys coming into a master's level educational situation, you're going to find, I think, in each class, we're very oriented towards the church as well. So it's not just academic learning for academic spinning around of ideas alone. Everything really comes back to the church. And what helps is that so many of our students are also involved in, volunteer or paid staff, that you can't help but sort of bring what's applicable from the class to that church base. And so every one of us as faculty are either a paid staff or a volunteer on a board or preaching, in the churches. So we really have that church-mindedness. The one thing I think about, two other things. One of them is the fact that whether you're going to be a pastor or a missionary, overseas full-time missionary in the Church of the Lutheran Brethren, you get the same education. And so our missionaries have that pastoral sense and awareness and education, but our pastors also have kind of a mission focus. We understand that as we go even to a local church, we bring a missional mindset to that, and we think like missionaries. How can we understand our community, our context, and better communicate with them? So both people on both tracks sort of live together throughout their training. And then I would think last kind of a bigger one, and maybe you have an opportunity for a conversation with Nate Oldenkamp in coming days if you haven't yet. But Nate sort of oversees in the practical theology area our spiritual care and what's called clinical pastoral education. It's a philosophy of sorts. It's a program, formal program that I think, maybe to summarize it, it helps the student attend to their own personal, spiritual, relational well-being, health, so that that person can minister to others as holistically and as effectively and for in a long period of time as possible. And so I think a lot of seminaries are starting to kind of get the sense that preparation for ministry is not just about books and theology, but it's about the whole person. And so how can we help incorporate that? We have a strong mentoring component to those classes: personality inventories, leadership style, conflict management, and then really just dealing with your own approach toward ministry and experiences to help you sort of, again, be more attentive to the needs of the person you're ministering to, not just sort of, I'm supposed to do this, 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 and this when I do a visit or something. So that's a component of our education that I think is robust, and it's growing, and it's unique.
Yeah, it's multifaceted, the seminary and what it offers. So besides getting a seminary trained pastor, what are some other benefits that the seminary offers to congregations or parishioners or lay leaders that maybe our listeners can take advantage of?
Sure. Well, I'll mention the podcast, which you can subscribe to on all the different platforms, and Embracing the Word, Reaching the World. I mean, there may be some things there, but if people are interested, again, distance education makes this possible wherever you're at. You can audit classes, and what being an auditor means is you get access to either logging in live for the class, or watching a recording, video recording as it happened. You're not required, or you can do the assignments, but that's not a requirement. So it's basically you come in and just sort of taking it in. So if you're interested in just personal enrichment and you want a better understanding of the New Testament or Old Testament or certain doctrines or things, that's open to people in the public. One of the things we love to do, and it's certainly been challenged a little bit with recent health situations, but you can invite us out to your church. We would love to come and do some teaching at your church. We're involved oftentimes in various conferences and things that happen across the CLB and other places. But if you've got a special need, maybe it's small group leader training, or it's evangelism training, or it's stuff on worship. So we'd love to make ourselves available for stuff like that. And then I would just mention LBDI again. You guys had Dr. Birkus on to talk about. That is intended for our churches to kind of get maybe a little taste of some of the training and teaching that we offer. Again, New Testament intro, Old Testament intro is coming. I just completed a worship leading course for LBDI that'll be getting posted here in the next month probably. We'll try to take a lot of our seminary courses and kind of put them into kind of we kind of talk about being kind of post high school level, so not real intense, but challenging and equipping hopefully for what takes place in the local congregations.
That's great. Thank you, Brad. As we think about ways that congregations and people in our churches can be a part of LBS, how can they be a part of supporting the ministry of LBS? I know a lot goes into preparing pastors, a lot goes into the programming, the ministry that you have. So what are some ways that lay people and our congregations can actively be a part of the ministry that you're providing?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. I mean, I will mention first, and not just to sort of get it out of the way, but prayer for us as a seminary and faculty and students. I mean, you guys know, having gone through here, I can attest this is a formative time in our lives to go through this kind of education. It's a crucible. We'll talk about that in many ways. I mean, it's intense educational learning while you're balancing family and ministry. So you can pray for our students too. So prayer is certainly huge. I think locally, having an eye in your congregation and saying, maybe you ask the question, who's our next pastor going to be? We love our pastor now, but he's not going to be here forever. Are there people, and they don't have to be kind of college age. It could be, it could be young. You could see some gifts, and to sort of identify that in your church and speak into that person's life and say, hey, have you ever, maybe you'll be a pastor someday. That might be the start of the conversation, or you should think about this. And then, encouraging that person up to the point. Maybe a third thing I would say is, as you have someone there and that you sense has those gifts, to sort of say, hey, we want to send you. We understand the need and the desire that local churches would have to sort of keep people and gifted people nonetheless, in their congregations, and Distance Ed makes some of that possible. But it comes to a point, most likely at some point they're going to have to move, and it comes to a point where you can sort of bless that and help support that, again, through prayer, through raising up a scholarship fund in your church for the seminary, or doing your best to either give yourself or to help kind of raise up some support. We would love to see more churches owning that mission of the seminary and our church ultimately by, calling out, identifying, and then sending and supporting students. I know my church did that. Many of our guys have that kind of support from their local church, and they don't have this sort of, we're going to send you there, and then this is sort of a string to pull you back to this plot. That might happen, but it's an open-handed sort of, we give you to the work of the kingdom, and would love to do that. So I think those are certainly prayer and identifying and encouraging, and then sending and supporting would be fabulous ways to be practically involved.
Nice. So going off of that question, give us the inside scoop, Brad. If we have a listener who is interested in attending seminaries, feeling that call of becoming a pastor, what are some things that they can do in order to become better prepared to attend seminary?
Yeah, and we're actually thinking about help kind of preparing some maybe some handouts or some things like this that might be passed around to the churches to help. But I would say first, just take advantage of the time you have where you're at to get invested in the life and the ministry of your church. It's really, it's a blessing to us. It's very noticeable when we get students that come that have done that they have not just sort of sensed a call and kind of danced around involvement in the church or have a few experiences, but we get someone who really has been invested in the life. Maybe they've done some preaching or teaching, done some things that might seem a little scary, but you're involved in discipleship or mentoring or evangelism ministries of your church. So kind of being invested as best you can into the life and ministry of your church. Of course, continuing to study the scriptures yourself and grow in your knowledge of the scriptures. For those that are thinking of ordained ministry, or even if you're not, getting into out of high school and completing a bachelor's is just a huge blessing. It's just a number of things that come from that. Not to mention what you learn, but just the habits and the growth that happens as you are equipped. We really like to see a minimum of an associate's type, 30 or so credits, at least as a minimum for our students, but I certainly appreciate if they've got their whole bachelor's degree. It just sets a foundation for composition and public speaking and history and the social sciences and all of that really help create a context that ministry and education at the seminary can build off of. And then I'd say lastly, talk to us. It's never too soon. Whether you're in a church and you know somebody and you see one of us, or you want to shoot us a note and say, hey, I've got this person at our church and I think they got some gifts. But if you've got some interest, we'd love to talk to you. It does not mean you're interested right now. There are plenty of people that express some interest, and it's a handful of years, before they may end up here. So we'd love to talk to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brad, for being our guest today. And as a reminder, you can find Dr. Brad Pribbenow at his blog, bradpribbenow.wordpress.com. That's BradPribbenow.wordpress.com. Don't forget to check out his podcast for LBS called Embracing the Word, Reaching the World, and his prayer book of Christ, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Christological Interpretation of the Psalms. And we'll put links to those in the show notes so you can check those out.
Very
Great.
cool. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in today. We hope that you learned a lot, and we hope that you're encouraged by the things that you heard. Once again, if you want to reach out to Brad, you can do that through the seminary, and you can find him there. We'd love to cover topics that you guys feel are beneficial or that you'd like more input on. And if you have any of those ideas, email us your comments and questions at podcast@clbforge.org. So that's podcast, the @clbforge.org. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you can get notifications when the next one drops. We've been putting them out on Tuesdays, and we'd love it if you could share the podcast with a friend or a colleague. Tune in next week. Oh, Ryan, I'm not going to do the train noise, so I won't put you through that again.
You don't have to. Thank you.
You're welcome. We don't want to embarrass ourselves
Thanks for sparing us. And if you wonder what that's
in front
about,
of a seminary professor. So, but tune in next week as we talk about our third derailing factor on our series that we are calling A Church on Track. Brad, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you.
Welcome. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
see you again.